Thandi was the kind of woman who didn't need to speak loudly to be noticed. She carried herself with grace, always calm, always kind. People admired her quiet strength, the way she smiled softly even when her heart was heavy. That night, she wore a deep blue traditional dress that flowed around her like water, and her gold jewelry sparkled gently in the light. She looked like a queen, elegant, composed, and beautiful. But what no one could see was the pain hidden behind her gentle eyes. Inside, Thandi was breaking. She had spent years pouring love into a marriage that felt more and more empty with time. She cooked his favorite meals, remembered every special date, stood by him in silence when he was angry, and always forgave, even when he forgot her birthday, even when he didn't notice her tears. People thought she had the perfect life, the perfect husband, but only she knew how alone she truly felt. Still, she never complained. She kept showing up, kept smiling, hoping one day Saifo would see her again. Not just as the woman in his house, but as the woman who once made his world feel whole. That night she looked beautiful, but she felt invisible. It was their 10th anniversary, a day Thandi had been quietly looking forward to for weeks. She wanted everything to be perfect. She wore his favorite perfume, styled her hair the way he used to love, and slipped into a beautiful traditional gown that hugged her softly. Her heart beat a little faster as she walked into Mbatha's most elegant restaurant, a place they had once talked about visiting when they were younger, back when love still felt alive between them. She had reserved the best table near the window where the city lights danced like stars. A small bouquet of fresh lilies sat in a vase, just like the ones he gave her on their first anniversary. Everything was ready. All she needed was him to walk in smiling, maybe holding a little gift, maybe just reaching for her hand like he used to. But when Saifo arrived, there was no smile, no warmth. He didn't even notice the flowers or her dress. He didn't even say, "Happy anniversary." He walked in with irritation written all over his face, like the dinner was some task he was forced to check off his list. He sat down with a heavy sigh, glanced at his watch, and picked up his phone like he was already bored. Thandi's heart sank, but she kept smiling, hoping maybe he was just tired. She tried to talk about their memories, their journey, how far they'd come. But every word she said was met with short replies or silence. He looked around the restaurant more than he looked at her. And then, as if the coldness wasn't enough, he muttered under his breath, "I don't even know why we're doing this." That one sentence cut deeper than any knife. Thandi looked down at her plate, her fingers gently touching the edge, holding herself together. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But something inside her shifted. This night wasn't the celebration she hoped for. It was the moment she realized. She had been loving someone who stopped loving her a long time ago. The food had just arrived, but Saifo wasn't even pretending to enjoy the evening. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone like he was somewhere else. Thandi, still trying to hold the moment together, asked gently, "Do you remember our honeymoon? That little beach in Mozambique?" She smiled, hoping to spark a memory. But instead of warmth, Saifo looked up and laughed loudly. "You still holding on to that nonsense?" he said, his voice sharp. "That was ages ago. People grow up, Thandi." She blinked, confused, but stayed calm. The waiter standing nearby froze for a second, unsure whether to leave or stay. Saifo didn't care. He went on louder now. "You know the real problem with you?" he said, pushing his plate away. "You're just a housewife. That's it. You sit at home doing nothing. You bring nothing to the table but cooked food and silence." People at nearby tables turned their heads. Some pretended not to listen, but their eyes were on Thandi. The waiter quietly stepped back. Saifo kept going. "You think wearing fancy dresses and booking expensive dinners makes you important? Please. I'm the one who pays for everything. Without me, you're nothing." He laughed again. Cold, cruel laughter that echoed in the high ceilings of the restaurant. Thandi sat still, her hands in her lap, her back straight. She didn't say a word. Her lips were calm, but her eyes had changed. She looked at him, not with anger, not even sadness, but with a strange kind of peace, like someone who had just woken up from a long, painful dream. Everyone in the room could feel the tension. Some looked away, embarrassed for her. Others stared, waiting for her to break down, to cry, to shout. But Thandi didn't move. Because her silence wasn't weakness. It was power. And Saifo had no idea that in a few moments, the woman he was mocking would completely change his life, with just one phone call. Thandi sat across from Saipho, still smiling, even as his words cut deeper and deeper. To anyone watching, she looked calm, too calm. Her lips curved gently, her chin held high and her eyes steady. But if someone had looked closely, they would have seen it. The small tremble in her fingers as she picked up her glass, the way her hand gently rubbed her thumb against the edge of the table to steady herself. It was the kind of quiet pain only a woman who's used to hiding heartbreak could carry with such grace. Saipho continued talking like she wasn't even there, throwing out harsh words like darts, each one sharper than the last. But Thandi didn't flinch. Her years of silence had taught her how to stay still even when her soul was screaming. Every smile she gave him that night wasn't to show love. It was to protect herself from falling apart in public. Inside, she felt like something was cracking. It wasn't just what he said. It was the years behind those words. The nights she waited up for him. The birthdays he forgot. The anniversaries she remembered alone. The little ways he made her feel small, invisible, unimportant. She looked down at her hands and took a quiet breath. Her nails were painted perfectly, her rings shining. She had come here tonight hoping to celebrate love. But instead she was mourning it. Mourning the man he used to be and the woman she used to be for him. But even in that pain, something else was building inside her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was power. Quiet, rising power. The kind that doesn't shout or slam doors. The kind that walks away with dignity and doesn't look back. Because Thandi wasn't broken. She was preparing. And the world was about to see what happens when a quiet woman stops shrinking herself for a man who never deserved her. Saipho was still laughing, proud of himself like he had just won some kind of battle. He took a sip of his drink and leaned back, looking around the restaurant like he owned it. Thandi didn't say a word. She slowly reached for her napkin, gently dabbed the corners of her lips and stood up. Her movements were calm, almost too calm. The room went quiet for a moment. Some people thought she was going to finally break down. Some expected her to storm out. But Thandi didn't cry. She didn't shout. She walked a few steps away from the table, pulled out her phone from her purse, and with steady hands made a single call. Her voice was soft but firm. Yes, it's time. Do it now. That was all she said. She didn't need to explain. The person on the other end already knew what to do. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, her eyes closed, breathing in deeply, like someone who had just laid down a heavy burden. She turned back toward the table, picked up her purse and looked at Saipho. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. Oh, so now you're calling your sisters to cry, he mocked. But she didn't answer. She didn't even look angry. Just calm. Peaceful. Almost glowing. What Saipho didn't know was that phone call had just flipped his entire world upside down. In less than 60 seconds, the life he thought he controlled was about to slip from his fingers. His job, his power, his comfort, all gone. Thandi didn't need to argue with him. She didn't need to explain who she really was. That call spoke louder than any of his insults ever could. And as she walked back to the table with quiet dignity, everyone around her felt it. Something had changed. Not just in the air but in her. The woman Saipho mocked for being just a housewife had just reminded the world that silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. For years everyone thought Thandi was just a quiet traditional wife, the kind who stayed at home, cooked meals, smiled politely, and supported her husband from the background. That's how Saipho saw her too. He believed she didn't know anything about the business world, that she was just a housewife who depended on his income. But what no one knew, not even Saipho, was that Thandi was far more than she appeared. Long before she married Saipho, Thandi had studied finance in London. She returned home quietly and began investing under a different name, Mrs. Zamana. No one connected that powerful investor's name to the soft-spoken woman who greeted guests with tea and wore graceful gowns to church. When Saipho got a job at a rising firm, Thandi had already owned part of it. As the years passed, she increased her shares. And eventually, she became the majority owner, silently running everything from behind the scenes. She hired the CEO. She approved the big deals. She saved the company when it struggled. But she never once used her power to brag or dominate. She stayed in the shadows, not because she was afraid but because she was watching. She watched how Saipho treated people at work. She heard how he spoke to women in meetings. She knew he looked down on people he thought were beneath him. And still she said nothing. She gave him the freedom to show his true self. And he did. He mocked her, ignored her, and embarrassed her, thinking she had no power. But Thandi had built the very empire he worked for. She had signed the checks. She had written the rules. And on that night, with one quiet phone call, she reminded him who the real boss was. Thandi had never been just a housewife. She was the queen behind the curtain, the power in silence, the storm behind the calm. And now the truth was no longer hidden. The whole world would soon know exactly who she was, and exactly what she was capable of. Saipho was still sitting at the table, clearly proud of the scene he had just created. He had no idea that people were recording him from nearby tables, that his loud insults were echoing beyond the walls of that restaurant. He laughed to himself, picked up his glass, and took another slow sip, completely unaware that his world was already beginning to fall apart. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It was his manager. Annoyed, he answered with a sharp tone. "What is it?" "I'm busy." But the voice on the other end wasn't steady. It was nervous, almost scared. "Saipho, I don't know what's going on, but you've just been terminated. Immediately. We got direct orders from Mrs. Zamana herself." Saipho froze. For a second he thought it was a prank. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "Your access has been revoked, all accounts frozen. Your name's off the system. I was told to let you know. Your services are no longer needed." Saipho's heart dropped. He could barely breathe. The phone slipped slightly from his hand. "Mrs. Zamana?" he whispered. "Who even is she?" Then it hit him. He turned his head slowly toward Thandi, who was calmly putting on her shawl. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look at him. She just stood there, peaceful, graceful, untouchable. His stomach turned. He remembered hearing that name before in board meetings and company memos. A name whispered with respect. A name no one had ever dared question. He had just insulted the woman who owned the very seat he sat in at work. In a matter of seconds, his pride crumbled. The man who once believed he was untouchable now sat powerless in the middle of a restaurant, surrounded by whispers and stares. And the woman he had humiliated just stood there, silent, calm, and in full control. Thandi walked back into the restaurant with the same quiet grace she had always carried. But this time, something about her felt different. Stronger. Brighter. Like a light had been switched on inside her. Her head was held high, her back straight, her steps calm and confident. She didn't look around or search for attention, but attention found her anyway. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Conversations stopped. Cutlery paused midair. Even the waiters stood frozen, unsure whether to move or stay still. People had seen the way Saipho had spoken to her earlier. They had heard the insults. Now they watched the same woman return. Not broken, not angry, but powerful in a way that couldn't be explained. She didn't say a word to Saipho, who was now sitting stiffly in his chair, staring at his phone, pale and shaken. He had just found out the truth. The woman he humiliated in front of everyone wasn't just his wife, she was his boss, and she had just ended his entire career with one phone call. Thandi picked up her purse from the chair, slowly placed the napkin on the table, and smoothed her dress with gentle hands. Then, without looking back, she turned and walked toward the exit. People took out their phones, some to record, others to simply capture the moment. There was something unforgettable about the way she walked. Not a single word spoken, but the message was loud. She didn't need to yell or cause a scene. She had already won. Her gelly fluttered slightly with her steps, and the gold in her earrings caught the soft light. She looked like a queen leaving her court, not defeated but victorious. And as she pushed open the restaurant doors and stepped out into the night, the silence she left behind spoke louder than all the chaos Saipho had caused. She didn't have to explain anything. The world had just witnessed what real dignity, quiet power, and self-respect looked like. And from that moment on, no one would ever look at Thandi the same way again. The moment Thandi walked out of the restaurant, the energy in the room shifted completely. Saipho sat there frozen, his face pale, hands slightly shaking. People were still watching him, some whispering, others pretending not to stare. He tried to act normal, like he was still in control. He waved at the waiter and asked for the bill, trying to keep his voice steady. The waiter came over politely and placed the receipt on the table. Saipho nodded and pulled out his platinum card, the one he always flashed to feel important. He tapped it once. Nothing happened. He tapped it again, harder this time. Still nothing. Sir, it's been declined." the waiter said gently, his tone careful but firm. Saipho frowned. That's impossible. Try again. He handed over another card. The waiter swiped it, paused and looked up. This one is frozen, sir. Do you have another? His chest tightened. Sweat began to gather at the back of his neck. He reached into his wallet and handed over a third card, his hands now clearly shaking. The waiter tried it, waited, and then slowly handed it back. I'm sorry, sir. This one is also not working. That's when Saipho realized. Thandi had cancelled everything. Every account, every card, every bit of access he thought he had was gone. His jaw clenched and his face turned bright red. Not from anger, but from pure humiliation. People were definitely watching now. Phones were still recording. The same man who mocked his wife in front of strangers was now sitting helplessly, unable to pay for the very dinner where he had disrespected her. The waiter cleared his throat awkwardly. Sir, how would you like to pay? Saipho couldn't even answer. His mouth was dry, his mind spinning. The man who once walked with pride, who looked down on the woman who gave him everything, now sat small and embarrassed, trapped in the mess he created. And the worst part? Thandi didn't need to shout or curse or argue. She simply walked away and let reality do the talking. She had walked in confidently earlier that evening, wearing a tight red dress and expensive heels, holding onto Saipho's arm like she belonged there. People had stared, whispering under their breath. She wasn't his wife, everyone could tell. But she acted like she was, smiling boldly, even tossing glances at Thandi like she was invisible. Saipho, feeling powerful, didn't hide it. He ordered wine for two, laughed loudly at his mistress's fake stories, and completely ignored the woman he had once promised forever to. It was as if humiliating Thandi wasn't enough. He had to bring another woman to dinner just to make his message louder. But that confidence didn't last long. The moment Thandi stepped aside and made that phone call, the energy changed. Saipho began to shift in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Then the call from his manager came. Then the declined cards. And just like that, the king of the evening turned into the fool. And the side chick? She saw it all unfold in real time. The phone call, the stares, the whispers, the waiter asking, Sir, how would you like to pay? She froze for a moment, her smile completely gone now. She could feel people watching her too, judging, mocking. Without saying a word, she slowly picked up her tiny handbag and stood up. No drama, no goodbye. She slipped past the table, didn't look back at Saipho, and quietly walked out of the restaurant. Her heels clicked softly on the floor and then nothing. She disappeared into the night like she was never there. No one saw her again. Not with Saipho. Not anywhere near his ruined life. Even the woman he betrayed his wife for didn't want to stay when the money, the image, and the pride disappeared. Saipho was left alone at the table, humiliated, broke, and abandoned. And the most painful part? The woman he threw away had never left his side, never embarrassed him in public, never made him feel small. But in the end, it was the loud one who ran, and the quiet one who rose. Saipho drove home in silence that night, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The restaurant scene played over and over in his mind. Thandi's calm voice, the manager's shaky call, the waiter's question, the side chick walking out without a word. Everything he thought he controlled had slipped away in a matter of minutes. Still, he told himself it wasn't over. Maybe he could talk to Thandi, explain things, apologize, smooth it over like he always did. But when he turned onto their street, his heart dropped. Right there in front of the gate were several black trash bags, his clothes, his shoes, his laptop, even the cologne she had gifted him last anniversary. All neatly packed but coldly placed outside like garbage. He rushed to the gate, confused, angry, embarrassed. Thandi, he called, trying to open the gate. But the lock had been changed. He tried again. Nothing. He pulled out his phone to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. The house, his house or so he thought, was completely quiet. Curtains closed. Lights off. No one came to the door. No voice shouted back. Just silence. And that silence said everything. He stood there for a while, hoping maybe she would open the gate. Maybe she would yell. Maybe she would give him a chance to explain. But Thandi had given him too many chances. Too many nights of tears. Too many years of disrespect. And now she had nothing left to say. Neighbors peeked through windows. A couple walked by slowly, recognizing him, pretending not to see. Saipho looked around, suddenly aware of how alone he was. No job. No money. No mistress. No home. He had laughed at Thandi in front of strangers. Now he was the one standing in the street with his life in bags, and no door left open for him. Thandi didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't make a scene. She simply changed the locks. And with that one quiet move she let him know she was done forever. The night after everything happened, Thandi sat alone on the balcony of her quiet home, sipping warm tea, wrapped in a soft shawl. She wasn't thinking about revenge or the drama. She was simply breathing, finally free. But while she rested in silence, the internet was already on fire. Someone had recorded the entire restaurant moment, the insults, the calm phone call, the powerful walkout, and Saipho's downfall. The video was uploaded with the title, "The Calm Wife Who Ended a Narcissist with One Call." Within hours it spread like wildfire. Millions watched. Comments poured in. Women from all over the world shared it on their timelines with words like "Queen Energy," "Grace Under Pressure," and "This is what quiet power looks like." Threads filled with discussions. Some praised her silence, others analyzed her strength. A few men tried to defend Saipho, saying maybe it was too harsh. But even those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support for Thandi. News blogs picked it up. Podcasts debated it. TikTok creators reenacted the scene with dramatic music. A new trend started, women pretending to make that one call with the caption, "Be like Thandi." But the most powerful part wasn't just the views or the headlines. It was the women who said they felt seen. "My ex made me feel the same way, but I didn't have the strength she had. This gave me courage. I'm done accepting less than I deserve." She didn't have to scream. She moved like royalty. And while the internet exploded with applause and admiration, Thandi didn't chase the fame. She didn't post about it. She didn't comment or explain. She simply let the world watch. And without saying a single word online, she became a symbol of strength for thousands. Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't need to be shouted. They just need to be lived. And Thandi? She lived hers like a true queen. 1 week later, Saipho finally broke. The same man who once sat tall in boardrooms, laughed loudly in restaurants, and walked like he owned the world now sat slouched in front of his phone camera, eyes red and voice shaking. He went live on social media, his face unshaven, his clothes wrinkled, and his confidence completely gone. "I just want to say I'm sorry to my wife, to everyone," he began, tears running down his face. "I made mistakes. I was under pressure. I didn't mean to hurt her." He sniffled between words, trying to explain himself, trying to spin a new version of the story. But the comments didn't show him mercy. "Now you're sorry? You laughed when she was hurting. Too late, bro. We saw the video." Even his tone felt hollow. He wasn't crying out of guilt. He was crying because he lost everything. His job, his money, his side chick, and most of all his image. The man who once believed he was untouchable had become a lesson in what happens when you disrespect the wrong woman. He begged the internet to understand, but no one cared anymore. Even his closest friends, those who used to support him, repost his business deals, hype him up, had unfollowed him quietly. Some even posted subtle messages like, "We stand with women who choose themselves." The likes were gone. The shares disappeared. His inbox, once full of admiration, now sat cold and empty. And Thandi? She never said a word. She didn't respond. She didn't watch. She was busy living, rising, building something new. Saipho kept talking, his voice cracking, his tears soaking his shirt. But he wasn't speaking to Thandi anymore. He was shouting into a void. Because when you break a woman who stayed loyal, silent, and loving for years, you don't just lose her. You lose everything she ever protected you from. And when she finally walks away, no amount of begging can bring her or your dignity back. After everything settled down, Thandi didn't disappear. She didn't hide or stay quiet like many expected her to. Instead, she did something powerful. She used her voice. Not to attack, not to boast, but to help. She launched an online platform called Her Silence, Her Power, a safe space for women who had gone through emotional abuse, silent suffering, and years of being made to feel small. It wasn't just a website, it became a movement. The logo was simple. A woman with her head held high, eyes calm, wrapped in a ghillie just like Thandi had worn that night. In her very first video, she sat in a plain room, no makeup, just honesty. She looked straight into the camera and said, I stayed silent for too long and it nearly broke me. But I found my strength, and now I want you to find yours. That video hit the internet like a wave. In just 2 days it crossed 10 million views. Women shared their stories in the comments. Some cried watching it. Some whispered thank you to their phone screens. And some, for the first time in years, felt like they weren't alone. Thandi didn't play the victim. She didn't bash Sifo. She focused on healing, power, and finding the courage to walk away when your soul is starving. She started hosting weekly live streams where women could join anonymously and talk. She brought in therapists, lawyers, and coaches. She built an emergency fund to help women leave dangerous homes. And with every step, her community grew stronger. Media outlets called her the soft warrior. Podcasts invited her to speak. But her favorite moments weren't the fame. It was when a woman messaged her and said, "Because of you, I packed my bags and chose peace." Thandi's story didn't just go viral. It saved lives. She had once been silenced in a restaurant. Now her voice was echoing around the world, giving strength to the women who thought no one could hear them. She had become more than just a survivor. She had become a symbol, a light, a voice for the voiceless. Thandi stood on the balcony of her quiet home, the golden sky melting into shades of orange and pink. The wind gently played with the edges of her geli, brushing against her skin like a soft goodbye from the past. She held a warm cup of tea in her hands, her fingers relaxed, her shoulders no longer carrying the weight they once did. For the first time in years she felt completely still. No chaos, no fear, no noise. Just peace. Below her the world moved as usual, cars passing, people laughing, birds flying home. But up there, in her own space, Thandi was wrapped in a quiet kind of joy. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the kind that fills you from the inside and doesn't need to be explained. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was Sifo. Again. She didn't panic. She didn't even feel sad. She simply looked at the name and smiled, not with bitterness, but with calm understanding. He was still trying, still calling, still hoping for a way back. But Thandi had already chosen her way forward. She let the phone ring. No need to answer. She didn't owe him anything, not anymore. Her silence said it all. Because now she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself. And in that soft moment, with the wind dancing through her gown and the sun kissing her skin, she stood not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a queen finally free.